Hey guys, welcome to the QuickShape introduction tutorial. This is going to be a very simple walkthrough of all of the features in QuickShape. So let's get started. Here is the preferences. Let's start with the draw buffer size. This is important. Basically, when you draw, there's a mechanism that says, did I select something or did I actually click the left mouse and start moving to begin drawing? You can see that if I move it very little here, there's no drawing. So you can just lower that size and that will lower that threshold to begin a drawing. The window buffer size basically lets you draw, by default you can draw kind of all around here. If you increase that, it will cut that margin in, so you'll, for example, only be able to draw like in here. Text size and it's pretty, and then colors are self-explanatory. The N-Gon snappy sensitivity is if you're in here and you have snapping on, see how it snaps right there, that value can be changed. So again, that's just like the draw buffer size. If your monitor resolution is much higher than mine, you might have to adjust that. Alt nav is if you use alt navigation. This work plane visibility will just always have the work plane visible. And with it off, it'll only you'll only see it when you absolutely need to see it. Auto orthographic will just launch you into orthographic mode when you run QuickShape. And then these two for sculpt mode and edit mode will kick you out of edit mode, out of QuickShape if you, for example, go into edit mode. So sometimes you do want to be able to use QuickShape in edit mode and sometimes you don't. So that's why that is there. So Jam and I really wanted a very simple and clean UI for QuickShape. So if you press Shift F, launch into QuickShape, you can change that hotkey in the preferences, but it's probably not recommended. You have the hotkeys all around the viewport here. If you press N, you can have, you see all of the shortcuts here. And then there's another menu. If you press Control D, that will bring up the pie menu. And these three areas, that's it. Everything's very visual, very simple. And that's all, those are all the features and information you need to use QuickShape. So one of the important things that you need to keep in mind when drawing with QuickShape is where is your drawing going to go. So there's a couple ways to visualize this. So let's start. We're going to start with the default QuickShape settings with the 3D cursor right here, view align right here. It's blue, so it's activated. We're going to make a plane. We are going to turn off QuickShape, plane, view, scale it up. So when we're in that mode, we're drawing basically on this plane. You can see. Now, right here, the direction will determine if it's extruding towards you or away from you or neutral. So let's do away, and then let's do neutral. And now you can see the difference right there. And so that plane is just always kind of being created. And then if you move it over here, the plane is going to be on that. Let me just show that. So when you draw like over here, you're actually drawing on that plane. So that's just something that you need to keep in mind. Let's do. Okay, so the next way to align. Let's go back to towards view. So the next way to align is if we press W and we're over a face. So that's going to pop up the work plane, and that's just going to be a visual representation of where we're drawing. And this the green line, the red line, is going to be the size. So if we do this, see how it extrudes up based on the size of the green line. And we can change that by pressing F. Here we have our cursor. And typically the brush cursor is also like about the same size as what will pop up, but when there's perspective involved, it's hard to see. But that's about it. So then you press W and you align to a new face. At any point, you can rotate this alignment by holding the right mouse. As you move, it'll rotate. So now here's our new one. Draw. You want to set it to a face again, press W. And it just goes based off where your cursor is, and it fires array, and whatever it finds is the alignment. you want to set it back to view, you just aim your cursor in the viewport, and when you press W, it will do another view align. So some more things to mention about the rotation. So wherever you right click from, it's going to fire array and try to rotate from that point. So like here, we're rotating right here. Here, we're going to rotate right there. Do a lot of really fast draw here, rotate it around, draw here, right here. Create this kind of sort of like drawing in 3D type of workflow. Some more things, you can rotate it. I mean, you can rotate it around the normal. So like this green and red line, if you hold Control, right mouse, and Alt, it will rotate. And this is important for, let's say, box, because now it's going to be aligned to that work plane. That's how you do a lot of like, off-angle details. Again, just W, reset it. If you want to, you'll notice that this is drawing right on the surface. If you want to move it off, you can just do this Control, right mouse button, and then as you drag down, it'll go off the surface a little bit. And this preview is very important because that's how you can know where it's going to be. If at any point you want to just set it to the ground without like making a plane and aligning it to that, you can just press Control Alt Shift W, and that's going to align to the ground. It's pretty handy sometimes. And then the second point align, the last thing here. By default, when you have the work plane rotation, it'll just kind of be freeform, like you're not really snapping to any angles, which is good for organic stuff, but sometimes you want to be in more control of that. So you can go down here into the menu, bottom work plane snap angle, turn that up, and now it's gonna increment to more precise movement. The next work plane feature we have, if you have it aligned to a face and then you press 0, it will basically align it between those 2 points. So it'll consider, like, let's try out 2 objects. Like, let's say it'll consider this where you press W as your first point. Now let's say right here you press 0 and it's now kind of aligned in between. You see that? You can get a little bit of an off angle without having to rotate. That's really what that one's for. And now let's start getting over to these other settings. So if you press Control W, that will align basically real time wherever your mouse moves. I don't actually use this one anymore because of this other one, which is Alt W. So with this one, if your first click is on a line, or let's start with depth, basically where you draw first, like your first click, that's what it's gonna set the depth to. So now your 3D cursor won't matter. If you put it here, it won't matter because you're just doing the first click. So the only reason that you would not use that and use the auto align feature instead is so with the first click depth, you kind of have to care about where your first click is, right? Because that's where how it determines what you're aligning to. Whereas with Control W, it just is aligned to the thing, so it's just automatically aligned, so you don't have to worry about that. And even then, with that, I still mostly just will manually align it with W, and then it doesn't matter where I start, and I can just do what I need to do. But that's first click depth. Now let's switch to align. So again, this is more useful with box. If you click, it'll align to this face. You click, it'll align to this face. Along normal is a really useful one. So it will basically, let's say that this is the normal. It will be along that, so you can draw like that. And so as opposed to this, it's on the face. Along normal, it's going to be along the normal. And then if you're here, and again, this one is also based on the first click. And then so the other one we have is on surface. So this is just going to draw on the surface. This is quite cool because it will do this little remeshing thing. As you can see, like this isn't just a single face. So you can basically draw around corners. In some case, you probably want to remesh that, but it also depends on the size. The smaller the size is, the more reasonable that deformation is. Okay, so that is the work plane. Just to recap, this W to align face, most useful, and then you just rotate. Press W in the viewport with your cursor in the viewport to reset it to view, and then Alt W, first click, first align, and first click depth, useful. Along normal is also a very useful one, and on surface, of course, another useful one. So basically, auto align is really the only one that I don't use that often, but it's still there. Now let's get into these, all these the draw style settings. So as you can see here, we have Shift Q to switch between our brushes. You can also switch between them here, and you can also, over here, you have your hotkeys 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So draw style is only going to be useful for box and circle. So if you the center, it'll draw from the center. If you Shift J, corner, it'll draw from the corner. We've already covered direction. Constrain again is only useful for box and circle. Show that box, it will just be constrained to a square. Without it, it's free. Same with the circle. Constrain, turn it off, and you can draw. Again, same thing. You can control the corner, control the center. So let's go over the shapes real quick. We already covered the lasso. Box is very easy to understand. Circle will actually make a cylinder, and then sphere is gonna make a sphere. But it's kind of, it's not a perfect sphere unless you get the actual the depth setting to match. So that's just how you can do that. Good for blocking certain things out. So now let's go, I skipped over Ngon because it's a little different. So this one actually works different. You click, and while you're holding left mouse, you drag out this first line. And then once you let go, now you have your Ngon shape. And then every time you click left mouse, it will draw another point. Backspace to delete the previous point. You can delete to delete the forward point. And continue, and then to confirm this one, you right click, and that will create the shape. Like that. Now, other relevant and settings when you're drawing in here, you'll see that it, like you only did 2 points right now, but you have a third one. So when you right click to confirm, it will create that next point, or that last point. You go into the Control D menu, that off by turning Ngon add point on confirm off. So now, even though you see it, it won't actually draw this point. Just do that. I like to have that on though. The snapping angle, so there's kind of a very slight snapping here that you kind of see, because it's set to 1 by default. If you turn this up, let's do maybe 25. So now you see it is snapping. Let's probably 45. So now see. So this part is really great for surface. You can, when you have more than 1 point, you can press A, and that will create an arc between your current point and the previous point. And then you just move your mouse left and right. Then again, left click to confirm, right click to finish drawing the shape. And at any point when you're in Ngon mode, if you shift and you left mouse and start drawing, you free mode, free draw mode, lasso mode. And then once you let go, you're back in Ngon mode. And continue. surface or just whatever shape you need. Then again, right click and you're confirmed. Some more drawing settings to know. Over here on the right, if you turn on, or if you start drawing and then at any point, let's say you press V, that will change the bevel. It's not going to be visible on a lasso, on a box, or Ngon. When you press V, see it's beveling, let go and it'll be beveled. And then you can draw every time with that setting. Same with all of the other ones. You can also change it before the fact. So let's say you have a lot of 3D bevel and it's just going to draw that. This one, you will actually see it on lasso. The reason that you don't see the 2D bevel is because there's a clamp overlap on the bevel to prevent your geometry from getting destroyed. So Shift T is another one. It's really cool. Just basically it's going to randomize between your depth, the cursor here by pressing F, and this value, which is pressing Shift T. So let's just draw a bunch. So see, it's randomized that. And that's a great thing to combine with, let's say, a little bit of bevel. Let's change the segments. Let's increase some taper as well. So let's draw first, and then we'll press Shift M. While we're holding left mouse down, we're moving left and right. There's our taper. Let go. Now every shape that we draw is going to have those settings. You can do a lot of interesting stuff like that. And at any point, if you want to reset, you press K, and you will be back to the start. So by default, the resolution is at 9, which is just kind of a decent amount of points. If you draw slower, you get more points. So that's just something to keep in mind. And if, depending on how fast you draw or how many points you want, you can lower this resolution. You will get less points. So see the difference there. But then if you draw slow, even with the resolution on 5, you can still end up getting a lot of points. It just it's a way to offset the speed, and that's for lasso. So with box, it doesn't do anything. Ngon, it doesn't do anything. With circle, it will just be the sides of the cylinder that you. So let's say 5, get less sides. Put it on 2, you'll get hexagon. Same with the sphere. A few more drawing features to keep in mind. While you can change this depth with F, you can also use the Photoshop hotkeys, little brackets. It's all over here. You can at any point, if you have an object selected, you can Alt F and it's just going to scale along that normal. You can, let's say, a really small one. So you can press Alt Control F and it will sample the size. So you can see over here it's changing based on what my mouse cursor is over. When you draw, you can press G before you've let go of the left mouse and you can move stuff. Same with rotate and scale. You can, at any point after you've drawn an object, you can press Shift Space and it will bring back the object. Then you just left click and it will draw it again. It's really cool. So we've talked about the depth, but there's another setting here called width. So that's what it says. As you press Control G, you will see this little cursor, and that's going to be kind of a preview of what you're drawing. Circle is nice, and this is also really useful when you are cutting. Let's change lower, so you can do little cuts like this. And again, all of these settings are also in here, or most of them are, but I tend to just use the hotkeys. So we've talked about drawing shapes, and now we need to get into the Boolean. So when you draw, if you hold Control, you'll see that the line turns red, and this indicates that you will be cutting. And the thing to pay attention with cutting is this cut through option. So if you have it on C, it's just always going to cut through regardless of the size of the object. If you turn that off, now it's gonna use the depth. So this goes back to the start of the video where you have to keep in mind where your object is and what direction it's facing. So for example, right here, you'll draw and you'll be like, oh, why didn't anything happen? But remember, we are on view align, the cursor is here, so it's gonna draw from here towards the view. So if you wanted to draw from, if you want to cut into the shape here, you can move the cursor here, and that's gonna go down. Or you can press W to align to the face, and that's gonna go down, or Alt-click for the first depth. All those different ways. Control-Shift-W will actually not Boolean because that is only for drawing on a mesh. So just to keep that in mind, in case you don't know what to expect, Control-Shift-W does not Boolean, only creation, but everything else, that is how that works. Keep in mind the location of your cursor, always keep in mind the orientation and how everything works that we talked about at the start. So then for the purpose of this video, we'll just turn this back, the cut through back on. So some of the other Booleans that we have is if you hold Shift, that will just separate. And you can always select multiple objects and everything will work. Shift will separate into multiple objects. If you do a Shift Control, that's gonna do a Boolean addition. So this now becomes one object. This is a little bit different than this setting here called merge to active. So merge to active is not going to Boolean anything. It's just going to keep merging. And that's important because inside here, the geometry is messed up, whereas here it is Booleaned. So another thing to keep in mind, merge to active also has like a special feature where if you are cutting with it on, it'll still work. So you'll notice, like if you tried to do a Boolean on this messed up object in Blender, it would crash. But having merge to active on, it will actually go and separate every object and apply a Boolean on each object and then join it back together. So that's just something to keep in mind if you are maybe working with like just regular modeling for a second and you happen to join it and you're like, oh, this is, you know, messed up. You can turn on merge to active and it will do that special setup to fix that. Now let's get to this one right. Last one. So intersect is gonna keep, if you hold Shift Control Alt, it's gonna keep everything inside the shape. It's really interesting. And now the expand and shrink. If you hold Alt, we'll get this blue one, and it's basically just gonna do a knife cut and extrude it. If you hold Control Alt, it is gonna do the opposite. It is gonna shrink it in. This looks like it cut, but that's not what it did. Let me show this. Yeah, so there it, even though it had cut through, because this isn't actually cutting, what this is doing is taking the object, knife projecting, and based on the depth, it is extruding either in or out, depending on the hotkey that you choose here. Now, cut through is important because it will project the knife cut through. So what I mean by that is let's actually change the depth to 0 so that we can see what's happening here. If cut through is on, it will cut through the object. If it's off, it will just cut on one side. And then the extrusion is the depth value. So that's how it works. It's a little bit different than the regular Boolean, but I hope that is clear. So the two ways really to work with this alt to do the shrink and expand is you have it on, you have the depth to set to some like certain value, and then you just are basically adding details or whatever. And then another way is if you're in edit mode, you probably want this to be 0. Now what this does is you can just draw selections and it selects it for you. So then you can do the extrusion yourself. If you turn on this extract after expand, that is gonna work with this expand tool. So when you hold Alt, instead of extruding, it is actually going to separate, it'll knife cut and then separate that object into a new object. Let's turn up the depth here so that's clear. So when you hold Alt, Subtract after expand on, this is now its own object. So that can be useful for adding details or something like that. So up until this point, all of the Booleans have been very destructive. Like there's no modifiers. What you see is just what you get. That's it. You can't edit it. But if you turn on some of these modes here, you can. So let's start with procedural mode by pressing Alt Q. And then let's say Control. You have the Boolean still. So always just move it around. If you turn on interactive mode, that will keep the Boolean live, also the Boolean live and the drawing live. So you can actually, as left and right, that's gonna change the size. If you want to do any of the Booleans without doing them at the same time as you're drawing, like let's say you just have an object and you want to Boolean it, you can select the object that you want to subtract from, and then go into the Control D menu here. You have subtract. You can also press minus. These hotkeys are right here. If you use this hotkey, you can hold Shift and it'll do a procedural one. If you want to do it through the menu, you would have to turn on procedural mode. And when you go in here, we'll do the procedural. And it works for all these. And if at any point you want to hide this thing, you can just click on this object that has the Booleans, hide. If you want to unhide them, you can show them. Last thing about these Booleans that I should mention is this setting in the Control D menu, this legacy Booleans. You're not really going to notice a difference with it on or off, but if something is not working, if something is crashing, you can try to put that on. It's just using the old Boolean system that we used to have in Blender. I'm pretty much using the new one most of the time now, but yeah, like I said, if something weird happens, the legacy Boolean will probably handle it, and it's a little bit faster too. So in the Control D menu here, we have mirror. One thing you're going to want to keep in mind here is just look at this gizmo, look at this mirror. The one where it has the little letter, that's positive. So if you want to mirror from this side that doesn't have a letter, you will have to turn on flip mirror direction. But basically this just applies a little mirror modifier to it. It's a nice helpful thing. Same with radial array. So we're gonna array around Z axis. And this is using the cursor, by the way. So if you move the cursor here, it'll do this. Same for the mirror. Linear array will array between where you draw and the cursor. And then this is the array amount. If you want to do a constrained axis, that will, so like when you saw me with it off, it just did straight up like this. Like it'll go at a diagonal, it'll go wherever you draw from. If you do a constrained axis, it will only do, it'll figure out the dominant axis and then just do it that way. Like as I move this, see it switched over this way. Kind of an interesting thing to do. Interactive array will just go into this separate different mode, and you can just wheel up and down on your mouse to adjust the copies, and then left mouse to confirm. And that covers this section. So now let's talk about these two settings right here in the Control D menu, material from active and modifiers from active. So if you have an object that has a modifier, let's just, for example, say it's got a remesh that you put on it, blocks mode, for whatever reason. If you wanted to draw a new object with that modifier, if you just turn on modifiers from active and you select it, your new drawing will have that modifier. This is actually really useful for our next add-on called Quick Assembly, and that's how it's going to all integrate through this feature. But that's just something there. You might still find a use for it even without Quick Assembly. And then the other one, material from active. So let's just make a material. Let's say that it's emissive. let's just say it's emissive. If we want to draw with that material, we'll turn this on, and then we can draw as long as it was selected. And this ties in with quick texture. If you watch the quick texture video, you know how that works. To use the voxel modeling workflow, when you go into Control D, you just want to set this resolution above 0. Then when you draw, this is going to be a voxel object. It's going to have this is going to have the remesh. And so as long as you select, you have this object selected, as you draw, join into the same family, and you can move it. So when you select this is like the main thing, and then these little bounding boxes are the separate objects that you can move, and you can hide them by just disabling the overlays. They're in the way. If you want to duplicate them or delete them, you have to use the Control-Shift-F menu in QuickDeform. So I covered that in the QuickDeform video. But as long as I said, if you want to just draw, you just select it. You can do all of the same Boolean and everything. Add objects, and then if you want to make a separate family, you just have to deselect it. And then this new object will now not be connected, and then you select it, it'll be in this family. Select this, it'll be in this family. The other setting in here is the smoothing, which is just going to add a smooth modifier to this. Let's turn this up. Let's increase this merger. So this adds even more smoothing. In this case, we're just going to have to crank this. And that's even more smooth. It does depend, like right now, this isn't that smooth, even though I cranked it up. You can first of all go above this value here. Yeah. So for smoothing, keep in mind that the more resolution you have, the more you would have to smooth it, and that can get slow. So you just, at a certain point, you would just want to lower the resolution, which in this case is raising this resolution, which means the voxel grid size will be larger, so it's less resolution. That's how that works. So this is going to get really, really smooth. See here. It's hard to estimate how small the object is going to get once it's like fully smoothed out. So I tend to do the smoothing later or leave it to just a really low value. Then I can just, if I want to, I can smooth it later. But the voxel resolution is something that I will be changing often. And the families is, the knowledge of the families based on what you select and what's going to happen there is very important. These settings down here have to do with the viewport and how your object is shaded. So if you do smooth shading, that will turn on this auto smooth thing under normals. If you do auto smooth, that will also apply this shade smooth. It'll set it to smooth instead of flat. Just depends if you want that. And then viewport cavity will just turn on some of these viewport settings. This is not really important stuff, but it is there. What's that? Yeah, so it'll just turn on this cavity stuff. So that was it for QuickShape. Thank you guys for watching. Going forward, besides the videos that I'll be making for the new add-ons, we've got Quick Assembly and Quick Sculpt coming up. Besides that, I'll just be doing more like actual demonstrations of how to use all of the tools together. So these videos were really all about just introductions, what all the settings do, and how to get started. Okay, thank you.